Hey, what's up, guys? Steve, Nozilla, from outside our garage, dropping stuff on the floor. Um, Playing around in the garage a little bit tonight. Actually making a pretty good amount of progress on the Ross Dry Sump installation. I've been doing a whole slew of aluminum hard lines, and I figured I would play around with this transmission a little bit today. I did actually sell my T56 unit, so that's actually packaged up on a pallet, getting ready to head out tomorrow, which is great. So now I'm getting kind of focused on the Samsonas. So right now I am going to be installing the Tilton throwout bearing. So I figured I would kind of show you guys what this all looks like. So here's the Samsonas. I'm sure you guys have seen this in previous videos. So this is let me get my finger out of the way. Sorry, guys. So this is what Tilton provides, and this is like the throwout bearing. I don't know the exact verbiage for this thing and the terminology. Actually, let's see over here. So they just call it an assembly adapter, and what this does is this bolts on to the gearbox. You can see there's two threaded holes in the gearbox there, next to the input shaft, and there's two big holes here. So this is going to slide over and it's going to get bolted down there. And then what's going to end up happening is we have this entire threaded section here. And you can see the inside of the Tilton throwout bearing is threaded as well. Now there's a very important adjustment that needs to be made when you install this, so that the clearance between this and the face of the clutch surface, the pressure plate rather, has I forget the exact amount, but it's very critical number. It's got to be very close to ensure proper engagement and everything like that, without actually rubbing and sliding all over the place when it's attached. So what they let you do is when this gets installed, this will actually thread on to this assembly shaft, and once you can get it threaded on. Well, if I could actually start getting it threaded on. There it goes. So I get that. That'll be bolted up. Just trying to do this for illustration purposes. So you can measure this distance now, and this is going to be from this to the bell housing, and then you'll have another measurement from the bell housing to the actual pressure plate surface. And you need to subtract those numbers and make sure that you have a difference that's within tolerance. Tilton specifies that on their website. And as I get closer to doing that, I'm sure I'll bring in the spec sheet and show you guys as well. So to open up your clearance, you would thread on, and that would give you more clearance between the pressure plate and the throwout bearing. And if you want to have less clearance, you would thread out. And how they do this, to lock this in place, basically, you can see that there's actually 4 threaded holes across this entire assembly plate. And there's one of these, there's like a little hanger on here on the side. So once you have it generally where you need it to be, anywhere from here to here, now like this distance obviously that's taking in and out is very minimal from one of these sections, one of these quarters. So once you get to that point, they provide this threaded rod, which essentially will go in place, and that'll prevent this thing from moving. And basically now it's stuck and it's positioned, it's clearanced, and it'll be in the proper space. So let me pull this back, and what I'll do is I'll start installing this assembly, and then we'll get to the point where we can start doing some measurements. Alright, so we have this assembly section pressed up against the gearbox now, and I've just started to thread in these 2 retaining bolts. I did put a little small dab of Loctite on there because we don't want them backing out for sure. Oh. So I'm gonna snug these down. This particular piece doesn't see much lateral stress. It's just going to be basically like a it's going to feel all the stress from the hydraulic throwout bearing pushing up against the pressure plate, but it is sandwiched against the gearbox. And you can see this is like almost like 1/4 inch thick billet aluminum. So she's on there nice, really sturdy. Get another little 1/4 turn on it. All right, so the assembly's all threaded on now. I don't have the ability to measure my bell housing against the pressure plate surface because obviously my engine's sitting up on a stand over there. So I am just going to thread this thing on right now, a decent amount, just so we can have a place to kind of keep it stationary. And then I'll kind of explain to you guys the next steps. You wouldn't think threading something on by hand would be so difficult when you only have one hand. Come on. There we go. And then I'm just going to take one of these bolts that they have here and just set it in here for the time being, just to hold it in place, and then I can kind of explain to you guys the process of how this works. So on these new hydraulic throwout bearings, I believe that most of these are the same. This particular one is from Tilton, obviously. There's 2 hydraulic lines. One is essentially going to be like your bleed line, and I believe there is a certain positioning that you want to use. I think it's the one on the uppermost side, or whatever one is higher is the bleed, and whichever one is lower is the pressure. I could be wrong with that, but I'm just trying to remember from the last time I did this. It's close to over a year ago now. So then the other side is going to get connected up to essentially your clutch master. So you'll have another soft line or hard line that connects up to this, that goes up to the master, and then when you depress the clutch pedal, the hydraulic fluid is going to get pushed into this line, and it's going to push out on this throwout bearing, which will then push into the pressure plate on the clutch, releasing the pressure on the clutch and essentially disengaging the transmission from the engine. So this is very similar to the same concept, same theory that you'd have like if you had like a master and a slave setup. And these are essentially like almost like an internal slave throwout bearing. So instead of having a separate slave mounted on the side of your transmission over here that's maybe operating something mechanical like a fork or a lever or something pushing in and out the throwout bearing, the throwout bearing on this one stays stationary, and it's got what's called like an internal slave inside of it, which pushes this out, which engages the pressure plate. Pretty cool stuff. This is all kind of fresh, new to me. This was the first time that I've ever seen or dealt with something like this. I'm definitely used to the old school master-slave style. So, but after seeing how this all works and obviously how it feels when it's installed, I definitely prefer this setup over the old setup. And there's a lot less to go wrong as well. So since I don't think I'm going to get to it tonight, because obviously this is going to be probably a few weeks from now, whatever, when the engine comes down off the stand, but I can kind of flip this around and show you guys how you would align this, or how you would clearance this properly. So this is the QuickTime T56 to RB bell housing. This is like a conversion bell housing, and you can see I've ordered my Samsonas with the T56 adapter on the front, and also the input shaft as well, because I already have a clutch with the T56 input splines set up for an RB flywheel, so I didn't see any point in messing around and changing the setup. And obviously the QuickTime bell housing is super nice because it is steel, it's SFI certified, and it's hell of a lot safer than running an aluminum bell housing out of like an auto gearbox or something with this. So that being said, so what's going to happen, we talked about the clearance between that throwout bearing, and the pressure plate. My pressure plate's up on the shelf behind me over here. But essentially what's going to happen is we're going to go over to the engine, and we're going to work our way around the back. And if you can imagine a flywheel being back here and the clutch being attached to the flywheel, we would then actually kind of install or bolt on the bell housing to the actual engine block. And then from there, we would take a measurement from the face of the bell housing, kind of like, I'll go back over here. So if you can imagine, this side's gonna be bolted up against the engine. This is what you'll be looking into. And what I usually do is I take like a straight edge, something like a ruler, a piece of wood, a level something, and I'll put it across here. And then as you look in through the back, you'll see the clutch and the pressure plate. And basically you want to measure the distance between this surface, so like this plane right here, to the pressure plate. And then once you have that number, you can bring the bell housing back over, install it on the transmission, and you can measure from that to that. And then you can basically keep on working this thing in or out until you meet the desired clearance, which is specified by Tilton. This sounds a little bit complicated maybe, and reading up on it online the first time around, it did take me a couple takes to grasp onto it, but it's pretty easy. It's pretty like simple, like addition subtraction type of thing. So don't sweat over it. And hopefully in a week or two, I'll have this engine prepped, and we'll be to the point where we can actually do this, and I'll do like a full walkthrough. In the time being, I'll give you guys a little bit of a rundown. Yep, there's the GTR. Poor GTR has turned into like a holding area for all the parts, fittings, and everything for that's currently for this car. I've done some walkthroughs of this engine before on my page, but there's some new things here, so maybe I could take a quick moment to just kind of like show everybody. So I think I've shown you guys, this is like the billet Ross dry sump. It does have the PRP block brace installed right here. It was a little bit upsetting, but not, I figured I was probably gonna have to do it. But obviously the PRP block brace uses a lot heavier hardware than your typical, sump hardware, for an OEM application, which the dry sump is of course, drilled for that. So I had to basically drill almost every single hole with the exception of the front and the rear holes out to, accommodate the larger bolts. So that was like, that wasn't the most fun thing I've ever had to do before, basically altering a very expensive piece. Next up, this is the Ross oil filter block. Basically, there's only now going to be an inlet. There's just a pressurized inlet on this. There's no outlets because there's no oil pump inside, the engine anymore. So how it's going to work is the oil in the engine will work its way down into the sump via gravity, and then it's going to be siphoned out from these scavenge pumps, multiple scavenge pumps. There's 1, 2, 3 scavenge outlets there, and they all come up into the first 3 sections of the pump, and these are the scavenge. So what this does is it actually not only pumps it out, but it helps create like a vacuum inside the sump as well. Those then go out to this huge, now mind you, these are 12 AN fittings and lines. They go through now pressurized through this 16 AN line. So this is definitely a big boy. So now we take the oil that we just scavenged from the sump, and now we're going to use this line, we're going to push it. And this line will most likely be going back towards the firewall. There'll be a bulkhead fitting. And then somewhere inside the car, I don't know if it's going to be under the dash or behind the passenger seat or in the trunk. I don't know, because there's not a lot of room in the engine bay. This reservoir will be mounted. And that 16N line will go to this reservoir, most likely one of the top outlets on the reservoir. And then another 16N line, most likely from the bottom of the reservoir, will work its way back. And that will come again from, imagine the firewall being there, a bulkhead, and it'll come down, and it's going to go into here. So now these first three sections are the scavenge sections of the pump. This last section is the actual, oil pressure pump. So this is where you pressurize the oil. So right now it's grabbing it from the sump, and then now from here we go into a 12N fitting, and now this is going to be a pressurized line. So this line right here will now most likely come in, and it'll probably go through either like an oil filter, a remote oil filter, somewhere mounted over on this side of the engine bay, and then it'll work its way around like an oil cooler in the front of the car, and then it'll come off the oil cooler and it'll go into here, and this is where the engine gets all of its pressurized oil from. So a little bit more complex, but in theory it's pretty similar to a wet sump. Really the only difference is now you have an external pump rather than an internal pump, and you're holding all your oil in this tank in this remote location versus holding it in the bottom of your sump under your engine. And this has a lot of advantages, one being the ability to take all of the weight of your accumulated oil in your entire system and relocate it to a different point in your car. So instead of being in the front, you can bring it into the back. This type of stuff helps with the weight distribution. Also, you have a much more low profile sump, so technically you can lower lower the weight of the engine in the car if you choose to. It also gives you like a lot more clearance for different things. The pump itself is a lot stronger and can be configured for a whole slew of different pressure outputs. And being that it's an external pump, you're no longer concerned now about drive collars on the crankshaft or gearings breaking inside your oil pump on the front housing. So one of the probably more interesting things now, it's not going to be as easy as going to be an oil change, because depending on the location this tank ends up going, it's going to require some thought to not get oil all over the fucking place. So that's what we're working through right now with the dry sump. We're definitely making some headway. I do have some fittings. There's some more fittings on the way. I'm going to have to be reworking all sorts of things in here that I didn't anticipate before. Pardon all the lines hanging off the turbo, but I just don't want to hit the floor right now. But all the wastegate piping is most likely going to have to be done. This was actually angled before, and like it was going to be interfering with these lines. This pressure line becomes awfully close to this manifold here. So there's probably going to be some kind of a shield made. All these lines down here are going to be wrapped. This line was just like a temporary line that I had, but I'm going to be putting like a metal vibrant line wrapped in the design engineering ink, 3/4 inch fire sleeve. And then all the two 16N lines are going to have the 1-inch fire sleeve. All sorts of fun things going on here. A couple people asked me why I installed the oil pressure regulator for the turbo when the Borg-Warner EFRs already have they have an oil restrictor pill inside them from the factory. Now, I could be completely off kilter here by doing what I've done, and I do certainly have a tendency to overdo things, but I chose to do this because I plan on running a ridiculous amount of oil pressure. And from what I can think about fluid dynamics and resistance, having a physical restrictor, it will certainly restrict the pressure up to a certain degree. But more likely, what it's doing is it's restricting the flow, which certainly impacts the pressure. But however, as pressure rises, velocity increases, and the velocity that's going through the orifice itself should increase, which should increase the amount of pressure. So that was my thought. I could be wrong, but either way, we plumbed in this OPR, and I think it's going to make a nice little addition to the car. And if we do if we do decide to change up turbo setups in the future or whatever, we'll have this here. It'll be ready, and we could make sure that this, any ball bearing turbo that's on here isn't getting too much oil. Also made this nice, pretty hard line. I posted this up on Instagram. This was a fun one. This took a few tries to get, but basically this used to be like kind of a not a nasty looking, but like a not so great soft line. So I did make a hard line. It comes off. It follows the valve cover, and then what it does is it comes over here, and then it goes down through this little secret channel down here, I'll call it. But this is actually where I had the previous one set up. Let me get this out of the way. So this is where I had the previous one set up too. But it just kind of sat back there. The hard line just looks super nice. It's protected. It's not going to get scuffed or scraped or damaged by anything. And it's actually clamped in. So I had these like little clamps here that I found for the 6-and line. And we put them in there. And it just all fits super nice. So what I did is I left a male fitting on the end here, and I got a little 45 coming off, and we'll just have a soft line that goes for the rest of the way underneath the water neck and over to the boost stock, thermostat fitting. So just kind of a cool way to do that. I think it looks nice. It simplifies things, and I don't know. I definitely enjoyed the look of all the hard lines. This was a new hard line I actually made before the engine came out. This was this will be going to the anodization shop. It was recommended. Hans from HXC Performance, as always, has good information to share with me, and it's recommended that I get all of my fuel lines that I've created anodized, because I haven't been running that much ethanol yet, but obviously I plan to run a lot of ethanol, and worried that the ethanol will break down the aluminum over time. So if it is hard anodized, that'll protect it from that. And here was the other little tidbit. The last troublesome problem with this friggin' mechanical fuel pump, I believe, is now resolved. And I'm sure that I probably talked to you guys a little bit about this before, but what was happening was my fuel, like I felt like my fuel was heating up, and it was causing some issues for me. So what I ended up doing was contacting Kinsler. I explained to them my entire setup, what I had going on, and they recommended that I remove my, I believe this is a 6-micron radium filter, a microglass filter. That's a very restrictive filter, and I had that filter pre-pump, so it was back actually close into the trunk. Actually, it's back over here. You can kind of see it. So yeah, so right there, I had one single filter right there, and then nothing up front. So the pump was trying to draw through this filter, and it was having all sorts of issues. And I think what was happening was that the fuel was heating up, and it was creating some cavitation in the system. So after the car would, get it up to operating temperature, it would start wanting to break up and lose fuel pressure. So what they recommended is that I still run a filter back there, but now that's a 25 micron stainless steel filter. And then I put my big boy, my primary filter, which is this 6 micron microglass filter. Now this is like specifically meant for ethanol. You would not need a filter this fine if you're doing normal gas. So now we have the pump only has to draw through the 25 micron filter, which is fine. And now we're on the pressure side of this, so it should have absolutely no problem overcoming this filter at this point. So this looks a little weird. I don't think I've ever seen another setup like this in the world. That might just because I'm an idiot, or I'm just fucking crazy or something, but I think it looks definitely looks pretty badass, and I think it's going to work well for the setup. I'm probably going to be changing up a little bit of how the rear end of this is set up here. And then I also went through the trouble of changing those little soft lines that I had going here for my soft bladers to hard lines as well. I think they came out pretty nice as well. And then this just has a soft line that comes back around the front of the engine, and it goes over into the radiator neck right there. Other things to note, the Ross Dry Sump valve covers. Super happy with these. I don't want to speak bad about the Hypertune covers. I just wasn't pleased with them. I was not pleased with how much, honestly, like what they cost versus what you get. This proprietary like O-ring seal that they made for this was kind of hokey, and it doesn't seal the front cam cap, you know, around where like the actual oil seal is in the cam seal. So you got to put like valve, not valve. You got to put like a gasket maker under here every single time you take these things on and off. The Ross ones are actually, I think, pretty close to the same profile, maybe a little bit slightly smaller profile. They use the OEM, you know, valve cover gaskets, which is nice because you can get them new and they work, and they seal the entire surface around the entire valve cover. I mean, if you get up close, you see like my dirty fingers are getting stuff on this, but I mean, they're just nice. I mean, it's basic black anodization, but you can see like all the machining. Their logo is nice laser etched. You have 4 ports up here. I'm thinking that these are probably 10 or 12 amp ports, 10 or 12 amp orb or so. And you can use these to obviously hook up to the top of the reservoir, you know, for venting gases and things like that. So we're probably going to end up doing some plumbing up there as well. Here is the outsider garage drive-by-wire setup. This is a Bosch 82 millimeter. This is set up on our Plasma Man manifold adapter, and this actually also has our ARP stud kit that helps attach one of these Magnus Motorsports Vangean adapters onto it. I am going to be running Vangeans, obviously. I have piping down there. It's going to be hooked up to here. I'm going to have to get some stuff redone. But, I mean, it's really, it's coming along. It's looking pretty good. And obviously, this is our outsider garage IGN 1A, you know, coil bracket. This thing is awesome, too. These coils, I've been running the car for a while. They are really cool. Huge, ridiculous overkill amount of output, but they stay cool and they run great. I'm sure anybody probably say you don't need those, and yeah, you're probably right. But hey, I am me. This is what I do. So probably going to be working some more lines, and then I have to finish up, you know, getting some fittings for down here. Get some more lines, and then I'm probably going to turn and burn and get this Samsonas hooked up. So I'll be taking this thing off the stand, getting clutch and flywheel, and we'll be doing our measurements, setting our clearance for the throwout bearing, hooking this up, and then at that point, it's going to get really interesting because, like I said, I have firewall adapters that need to go in here, firewall bulkhead adapters for 16-amp hoses for 2 of them, plus a vent if we do a vent. So there's going to be a great deal of plumbing that has to happen down here. And some of it's probably going to end up having to happen when the engine is actually in the bay, because I want to make sure that we're not interfering with any critical clearances. I want to see how this thing sits, so we might just drop it in just to see how it sits and then maybe take it back out. Remember, I have the exhaust that comes down here as well, so I'm going to make sure that all these things are tied up and pushed back. But again, we're going to have 2 16-amp lines coming back through here, so we need to make sure that there's ample clearance. My goal originally, or what I really would have loved to do, would have been to keep the reservoir up in the front of the car, but there's just no room. The way that the intercooler sweeps back on either side, there's no space to drop it in here or there. You can't drop it in here or there. There's not enough room there or here. So you're really limited to taking it back. And I'm thinking either where the accumulator is right now, behind the passenger seat, or mounted up against the firewall below the passenger dash. So I definitely have a lot of planning to do. This is by no means a simple, straightforward, easy job, which I probably thought maybe a little bit more than it was when I started it. But as you do stuff like this, there's always that next step, that next step, that next step. And then I'm even like, I mean, I have like this Nexus ECU to go in here, and then I have that, and I'm like thinking to myself, well, do I redo the harness? Because I mean, the Nexus is, I have a unterminated harness for the Nexus too, so literally I could start that all over again and run it, rework it, knowing what I know now to do it a little better job. So we're probably going to do that too. It's going to be it's going to be a big job. So maybe by sometime in the spring we'll be ready to take this thing back to the dyno and have like our second quote unquote like first start with the dry sump. So it should be interesting. But I think what I'm going to do is take the belt off the dry sump and hook it up like and try to spin this thing and pre-pressurize, you know, the engine while it's standing still with all the hoses and reservoirs hooked up outside on the stand. I think that'd be kind of an interesting test to do. And that way we can also filter everything through the system, make sure there's clean oil everywhere, make sure any debris that was in the lines gets picked up in the filter. And then when it goes in the car, we can put fresh oil, fresh filter on it. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it for the night. So I'll leave it at that, guys. Sorry for such a small update. There's a lot of other really, really big, much more interesting things happening right now that I'll share with you hopefully soon. But for the time being, have a good night. Back to work.